Hello, welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session. Humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, Lautenberg Reauthorization, and ways to help. You go ahead and go to the next slide. The Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Go ahead to the next slide. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there's a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any technical issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenters for today. Please go to the next slide. Our presenters are Caitlin Mullen, Associate Director for Pre-Arrival Services, and Melissa Sulif, Family Reunification Specialist, both with CWS. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Caitlin.
So next slide, please. So thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. My name is Caitlin Mullen, and along with my colleague, Melissa Sulaf, we are looking forward to talking with you about the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, the reauthorization of the Lautenberg program, and ways that you can help during the ongoing humanitarian crisis that is currently unfolding in Ukraine. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, commonly known as UNHCR, reported that 4,382,316 individuals have fled Ukraine since February 24th, when Russia invaded Ukraine. This figure was from April 7th, and then just 3 days later, on April 10th, the number of refugees that fled Ukraine increased to 4,547,735 individuals. That's more than 150,000 additional people over the course of just 3 days. This is the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. The rate at which Ukrainians are fleeing is unprecedented. It's estimated that there are an additional 7 million internally displaced within Ukraine, having been forced to move inside the country due to ongoing violence. As you can see in the chart on this slide, many Ukrainians that are fleeing their homeland are going to neighboring countries, with the vast majority going to Poland. If you are interested in staying up to date on the Ukrainian situation and migration that's currently happening in Europe, knowing just how many individuals have had to fled Ukraine and the countries that are currently receiving them in Europe, I would recommend utilizing the UNHCR website. The link is provided directly on this slide. UNHCR updates the website daily with a number of Ukrainian refugees and provides flash updates outlining the latest on what's happening and what resources are being provided there. Next slide, please. In response to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, on March 3rd, the Biden administration announced it will designate Ukraine for temporary protected status, allowing Ukrainians that are currently in the US to remain in the country without fear of deportation for 18 months. And then on March 24th, President Biden announced that the United States will welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians and other individuals fleeing Russia's aggression through the full range of legal pathways. In this statement, legal pathways specifically was defined as including the US Refugees Admissions Program, non-immigrant visas, parole, and other means. The White House noted that they anticipate many Ukrainians will choose to remain in Europe, to remain close to family and their homes in Ukraine. But this commitment was created to provide refuge to displaced Ukrainians. At this time, we are currently awaiting details about how and when the 100,000 Ukrainians will arrive in the United States. Unfortunately, that specific plan has not been outlined for us yet. It's currently unknown how many individuals would be expected to arrive as refugees versus a different type of immigration status. Just recently, as of last week, the Refugee Council USA, with input from the executives of the 9 resettlement agencies that are established in the United States, put forward a letter to President Biden with recommendations for implementing the president's pledge to welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees to the United States, and specifically how the United States Refugee Admission Program can be utilized to welcome these individuals. Next slide. So the United States actually has a long history of welcoming Ukrainian refugees prior to this humanitarian crisis. Since 1975, the United States has resettled 339,606 individuals from the Europe region. A large portion of individuals processed through the Europe region represent individuals from the former Soviet Union. To focus more specifically on Ukrainians, between FY 2012 and FY 2021, the United States resettled 19,163 Ukrainian refugees. And as of March 2022, the US has resettled 704 Ukrainian refugees this fiscal year. And just for your information, our fiscal year for the resettlement program begins on October 1. So this is every Ukrainian refugee that arrived to the US between October and March. As you can see in the chart, the largest number of refugees arriving was in February of this year. These individuals arrived through a long-standing refugee resettlement pathway for religious minorities from the former Soviet Union. So these individuals that were arriving had existing cases with the US resettlement program. Their cases were not a result of the current humanitarian crisis that is underway. This pathway that we've historically seen Ukrainians arrive to the US through is called the Lautenberg Amendment, which my colleague Melissa will talk to you more in depth about.
Thank you, Caitlin. So as Caitlin just introduced the work, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lautenberg Amendment and what it is. So as you can see here, it was first enacted in 1990 and is different from other family reunification programs in that it is reauthorized each year. So this program allows for certain nationals of and living in former Soviet Union countries to apply for access to the refugee admissions program in the United States. A Lautenberg Affidavit of Relationship, or an AOR for short, is filed for these applicants. And then in 2004, this amendment program was expanded to include religious minorities who are nationals of Iran. And this is a separate application than the AOR. And we're only going to focus on the AOR today since that's for former Soviet Union applicants and specifically Ukrainian applicants. And then another thing to note about the Lautenberg Amendment is that applications can only be filed as it is, it's reauthorized each year. And so each year there's a deadline to file these applications. And Caitlin mentioned that the fiscal year for the refugee program is October to September. So that deadline is September 30th of each year. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just touch the surface on filing eligibility for the Lautenberg program and for the AOR specifically. So the beneficiary, this is an individual who's being applied for, and it can be family units as well. It doesn't have to be just one individual. They must be citizens of a former Soviet Union country and be a religious minority that Caitlin had referenced already. So the eligible religions or practices, as stated on this slide, are Jews, evangelical Christians, Ukrainian Catholics, members of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, and Greek Orthodox Ukrainians. And so in order to file and complete this AOR, a U.S. Thai must approach a resettlement agency in order to file the application. And so the U.S. Thai is an individual who's already residing in the United States with immediate relatives living in the former Soviet Union. And this U.S. Thai must be legally residing in the United States, but legally residing is pretty broad for the purpose of the Lautenberg program. They can be admitted to the United States as a refugee, been granted asylum, admitted as a lottery winner. They can be a naturalized U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, immigrant visa holder. And for this Lautenberg AOR program, regardless of the date of their arrival, a U.S. Thai can apply for their family members. And then the only other qualifying criteria for a U.S. Thai, they must be at least 18 years of age or older to file. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned previously in the previous slide, the U.S. Thai and the applicants must have a qualifying relationship. And so this lists all of the different relationships that a U.S. Thai can have in order to file one of these applications. So as it says, it can be a spouse, parent, children of the U.S. Thai, regardless of their age and marital status. And it's worth noting that they can be biological, step, or legally adopted children. They don't have to only be biological children. Grandparents, they can apply for grandchildren. They can apply for their siblings, regardless of age and marital status. And then other members of a family can be included in this application if they have certain documentation. And I won't go into the details about it, but the Lautenberg AOR also requires some substantial documentation just to prove their membership in a religious group, to prove the relationship, to prove legal status and citizenship. So all of those things, copies of those documentations will also need to be included with this application. Next slide, please. So where to file? Where can a Lautenberg AOR be filed? So this image here shows the CWS US Programs Network, where we have offices and community partners across the United States. So in order to file a Lautenberg AOR, US Thais must apply through a resettlement agency in their area. It's worth noting applications will only be considered if they come through a local resettlement office. So as this slide states, not all of our offices in the cities shown here resettle refugees or file family reunification applications. Some of these offices have other programs and other services that they do and other populations they support. We do have about 32 offices currently that can file family reunification applications, including the Lautenberg AOR. And just a statistic worth noting, to date, CWS has filed 724 applications on behalf of 2,556 individuals. And then I will pass it back to Caitlin.
Thanks, Melissa. So as we all continue to watch and read the news on the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, we understand that there's a lot of interest in how to get involved and how to help. So one way to help is to donate to CWS's Ukraine Crisis Response Fund. CWS established the Ukraine Crisis Response Fund to address the unique needs of Ukrainians displaced by Russia's invasion. We will respond in the neighboring country of Moldova, where, as you saw earlier in an earlier slide, there are now more than 400,000 Ukrainian refugees. They are living with host families or staying in hotels, apartments, and shelters. In order to meet the immediate needs, CWS will support partners on the ground as they offer shelter to Ukrainian refugees and distribute food, hygiene items, and school supplies. Another way to help is to advocate for Ukrainians. It's imperative that Congress holds the administration accountable to ensure refugee protection and humanitarian assistance for vulnerable displaced populations impacted by the violence in Ukraine. They'll need to fully rebuild and strengthen the US resettlement program and extend similar protections to other vulnerable refugees around the globe that are also currently impacted by violence and persecution. If you visit the CWS website, you can find a sample script of how to advocate to your senator and representative to protect Ukrainians. You're free to use your own script as well, or say whatever you would like, but I know sometimes it's helpful to have a guide on what to be communicating and what you're asking and advocating for. You can also amplify CWS's tweets on the need to build the US resettlement program as part of our humanitarian response to Ukraine. You can do this by retweeting on social media or using hashtags such as Ukraine and Stand with Refugees. You can also help by creating your own online fundraiser to benefit migrants and refugees in Eastern Europe. Through this link, the link that was provided on this page, you'll see various ways to fundraise. Some examples include pledging a special day, such as donating a special day like a birthday or holiday in lieu of gifts, hosting a virtual event, creating a memorial or tribute page, creating a challenge for you and others to take with you, or raising money. You can also help by walking in solidarity with Ukrainian refugees by joining CWS's National Crop Hunger Walk for Ukraine. The Crop Hunger Walk is an annual event. This year, it's specifically a hunger walk for Ukraine. So between now and April 22nd, the challenge is to walk 117 miles in solidarity with Ukrainian refugees seeking safety in Moldova. So you might be wondering why 117 miles, and that's because many Ukrainians are arriving in Moldova are coming from the port city of Odessa. The distance from Odessa to Moldova's capital is 117 miles. We understand that 117 miles might not be feasible for everyone. That is definitely okay. You can set a smaller goal if necessary for you. You're also able to choose your location. You can walk on your treadmill, in your neighborhood, in a park with friends. It's really what you feel comfortable with. You can ask friends and families to donate in support of your efforts, and those funds you raise will provide help to Ukrainians seeking safety. Your donations can provide mental health and psychosocial support, food, shelter, water, sanitation, and cash assistance to Ukrainians fleeing conflict. And in the map earlier, Melissa showed you specifically the CWS network. We understand that not everybody on this call today is in a state where there is, or a community where there is a CWS office, and that's okay. We still encourage you to connect with your local resettlement office to see ways in which you might be able to support their efforts, to learn more about whether there is a Ukrainian community where you live, and see how you can help those that have been impacted by the humanitarian crisis. Many Ukrainians that are currently here have relatives or friends that are still in some dire situations. So any support that you might be able to offer, you can connect with those offices to see where the greatest need is. So if you are not located in a CWS location, you can get in touch with one of the other 9 resettlement offices. There's 9 resettlement agencies in the US, and we each have affiliates across the United States. So if you're not in a CWS location, you can contact one of the other resettlement offices. And this very last link that's included on this link is the USRAP affiliate directory. So USRAP stands for the United States Refugee Admissions Affiliate Directory. The link here will take you to a document that lists all of the local resettlement offices for each 9 resettlement agency throughout the US. It'll provide you the city in which it's located, as well as a contact number, so you can directly reach out and get connected and see what the greatest need is and how you might offer your support. If you know someone that you think might qualify for the Lautenberg program that Melissa spoke about, I would recommend connecting them to a local resettlement office so that they can be assessed on whether they might be eligible for this program. As Melissa mentioned, there are quite a few eligibilities regarding religious minorities and relationships with individuals in the US. So it is important that before you start telling anyone to compile documents or filling out any forms, that you are connecting them to that local office to see if this is the right pathway for them. And if you do know someone that might benefit for the program, we would recommend that they reach out to a local office now to inquire about the program rather than waiting. As Melissa mentioned, this is a program that closes on September 30th each year. And we have seen it be reauthorized each year, but the date of reauthorization does vary by year. I believe the earliest we've seen it be reauthorized in years past is about December. But this year we only saw that reauthorization happen in March. So if somebody is eligible now, we want to make sure that their application is submitted for processing before the program closes on September 30th. Most resettlement agencies have to set an internal deadline for when they can accept the last application. And that's really because in the entirety of this program, we have always seen a trend in the Lautenberg applications being filed mostly in September, and that really creates a backlog on capacity of staff members' ability to file all these applications, make sure that we are vetting them. We want to make sure that we're submitting applications that have all the documents and are complete so that we're not seeing any processing delays later down the road for these individuals. So usually local resettlement offices or national resettlement agencies will have an internal deadline that's about a week or so before September 30th. So that's why we just encourage folks to start contacting the local offices to see if they qualify for this program now instead of waiting, just to make sure that we can smoothly get their application in. And with that, we can open up this call for questions. And thank you all again, really for taking the time to learn more about the Lautenberg program, and also about the ways in which you can get involved.
Thank you so much, Caitlin and Melissa. We're going to begin answering questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So, and I don't see any questions there yet, so you still have time to go ahead and add, but that's okay. If we don't have any questions, I have a couple that I'd like to follow up with you all about. One being, I know that so we have heard about Ukrainians at the U.S. southern border coming through, through Mexico, or perhaps they've, traveled to Mexico or other, Central or South American countries, and then made their way to the U.S. Southern border. Wondering a little bit if you all are aware of or understand what that process might look like for them, and whether there's any specific processes in place or any particular policies that give Ukrainian refugees sort of a pathway, towards some sort of legal status going that direction.
Sure. So unfortunately, we don't have any official numbers like you shared. Really, a lot of what we're seeing right now about Ukrainians coming in through the southern border is what we're seeing in the news. Just what we've anecdotally learned from the news is that we believe Homeland Security has reported that these individuals may be considered for humanitarian parole. So for those that are not familiar with that status, humanitarian parole allows an individual who may be inadmissible or otherwise ineligible for admission into the US to be in the US for a temporary period for urgent humanitarian reasons. So this is a status that we typically see be approved for about 2 years. It does vary. It is not a permanent status, so these individuals would have to file legal documents to adjust their status later down the road. Humanitarian parole status does vary greatly from refugee status. If someone were to enter the US as a refugee, they would be eligible to receive services through the USRIP. Through reception and placement services, they'd have a 90-day service period where they would be connected to getting enrolled in school, employment assistance, getting connected to medical insurance and benefits, whereas those individuals with humanitarian parole don't have access to that similar program. So this is still an area that we don't know much about, unfortunately, but definitely something that we have an ask out on whether these individuals are included in that 100,000 that President Biden had mentioned earlier this year.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, just curious. And another kind of question, just sort of out of curiosity, you all had mentioned, at least for the Lautenberg Amendment or Reauthorization, that part of that process of gathering kind of the right documents and proving, you know, who you are in relationship, and also that sort of religious status or practice. I'm just curious what that involves. You know, proving that someone is Jewish or is part of an evangelical Christian or Ukrainian Catholic tradition. What does that look like for them to prove that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Derek. So for some, it might just be a letter provided by their church or their pastor or their church leader, practice leader. For the Lautenberg AOR, there is a document that's called a preliminary questionnaire that each applicant 14 years and older has to fill out. And one of the questions on the PQ, they call it the PQ for short, one of the questions is asking them to say what religion they are, as well as provide the name of the church or the synagogue or the location and the address if it has a street address as well. So generally, I've seen that that's enough. Providing letters always helps as well. Usually it's something similar, or a baptismal certificate is something else for the practices that have baptism and provide certificates for that as well.
Great, thank you for that information. And then, you know, you all talked about, you know, the Lautenberg Amendment and Reauthorization as it pertains to sort of the pathway of, you know, a family member that's you know, asking for someone to come because of their you know, relationship with that person, as part of that sort of family reunification. But then when we're talking about sort of what President Biden, you know, seems to suggest that there may be Ukrainian refugees coming as part of, because they are refugees crossing over that international border, you know, for safety, that they up to 100,000 refugees from Ukraine may be resettled. Do we have any sense of when those types of R&P refugee resettlement may occur? Are we talking, you know, in the next 3 months, or are we talking over the next year or two?
So we don't have a concrete deadline. That is something that in this letter that was proposed to President Biden, it was a specific ask on what will this 100,000 look like? How many of these individuals will actually arrive as refugees through the USRIP program versus how many will potentially arrive as parolees or on different non-immigrant visas. So that is not something we currently have information on, but with the number of individuals fleeing Ukraine and registering with UNHCR, we could potentially see an uptick in the priority 1 referrals. So there are 3 different pathways in the United States Refugees Admission Program. Currently, the Lautenberg program that we talked about is considered a priority 2 group. This is a designated group that is set each year by the president, saying that this is a special group of concern. So this is specifically the religious minorities coming from the former Soviet Union countries, whereas priority 1 would be access to the program through a UNHCR referral. So that's something that we might see that would be new for Ukrainians. That typically is not how we see Ukrainian refugees arrive through the program. There is also another family unification program called Priority 3. This is a different type of affidavit of relationship that can be filed on behalf of individuals that are overseas. The restrictions are a little different, and it would have to be filed by someone in the United States that has been here for less than 5 years and had entered the US as a refugee or an asylee themselves, and they would have to have a qualifying family member. So that relationship would look like a parent, a spouse, or a child under 21. So that is another family unification option, and that would allow someone to gain access to the program potentially through a priority 3 group. So that application, if you are aware of someone that might fit that particular program where there is no requirement to be a religious minority, you would still be able to connect with your local resettlement office, and they would be able to assess the individual in the United States to see if they qualify for that program and whether that application can be filed on behalf of their relative overseas.
Thank you for that. Another sort of area, some of our audience that is in attendance for these lunch and learn sessions are staff members at other RAs and local affiliate offices, but also very many, a lot of community sponsorship groups, potential volunteers and community partners and that kind of thing. So kind of focus a little bit on potential co-sponsored groups. Do you know kind of, or what would you sort of recommend if someone was a member of a community group or church or something like that that wanted to get involved? What kinds of study perhaps or other kinds of things should they try to become familiar with in order to be prepared to welcome and support perhaps a Ukrainian family that may be arriving? What kinds of thoughts do you have about how they can prepare themselves for that?
I would recommend that folks be mindful of the situation that these individuals have gone through. There's a lot of trauma there. So if you are welcoming a Ukrainian refugee, be mindful that they've had their lives uprooted in a very short amount of time and have experienced a lot of violence. So there will be an adjustment period, and they will need that psychosocial support upon arrival. Doing research on whether there is an existing Ukrainian population in your community that you might be able to connect them to just have that sense of unity and community upon initial resettlement in the United States is very important because it is such a foreign experience and can happen very quickly, and they might be going to a location that they are not familiar with or might not have any ties or really don't know anything about. So really, I would just say the support and having that sense of community for them is one of the most important things you could do. And also really connecting, if there is a local resettlement office in your area, connecting to them to see if they can give you advice on their experience working and resettling Ukrainian refugees in the past and what that experience is. And again, if you are already working with your local Ukrainian community or a particular refugee family, it's really important to make sure that they are aware of the different family unification options that might be available to them. So you don't have to know right off the top of your head whether they would qualify, but it is important to give them the information on these programs and recommend that they touch base with the local offices because they're the ones that can file these applications. It is important to note that if you are aware of someone who has an active Lautenberg application already in process for their relative, while we cannot advise anyone to cross borders, if someone does flee Ukraine on their own accord and they have a Lautenberg application that is already being processed, it's really important for them to notify the Resettlement Support Center overseas that they've moved. Right now, due to the situation, there is no active processing going on in Ukraine. So it's important that they would notify the RSC, Resettlement Support Center, of their new address, new location, so that their application can continue processing. There is a very specific website or email address that they need to use to make that update. That's icc@iom.int. And if they do move, that's really the first thing that they should be doing, is making sure that they've communicated their updated address. So just getting information out to your local community members, or if you are working with a particular family, to make sure that they know that.
Yeah, that's great information and a great general, advice on what people can do, how they can be prepared, and working with your local resettlement agency affiliate office if there is one nearby, connecting with your local if there is a Ukrainian community organization or group, and to do some of that also, like making sure that they have information about the different possible routes for family reunification and other forms. Does there happen to be something written, instructions in Ukrainian that someone could share, or if there's something, if you know of something like that, we can share that in the email. Or if there happens to be a website or something like that, that's already been translated. But we'll also include this presentation in that follow-up email to people as well. But so if you happen to have it or think of one, please let me know, and I can always follow up with people and send that out. I just wanted to thank you both so much for being here, for sharing your expertise and this valuable information right now, both for people who are in attendance right now and via video, because this is being recorded. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you again and thank everyone for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. If you have any questions, please contact info@refugeewelcome.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, as well as descriptions of more upcoming Refugee Welcome Lunch and Learns, including, as Caitlin was suggesting, one thing to be prepared was recognizing that refugees, and specifically Ukrainian refugees who may be coming, are experiencing significant trauma. Just as a plug for next week's Lunch and Learn, it's about trauma-informed care and working with clients from that, with that sort of perspective in mind. So just wanted to put a quick plug in for that. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.